All right. Welcome everybody to the April 2024 meeting of the Urban Forestry Commission. My name is Patrick Gilbert. I'll be your host for this afternoon. We'll start with introductions. I'll start from commission members on my right.
I'm Patricia Grace.
John.
John Michael Henson, Commissioner.
Karen McNeil, Urban Forestry Commission.
And now I'm Patricia Grace.
Zoe Boyle, Urban Forestry Commission.
Chardon Dietrich, Urban Forestry Commission.
Christy Fiore, Urban Forestry Commission.
And I'm Patrick Gilbert. I'm the chair of the Urban Forestry Commission. Our City Council liaison, Kim Roney, is not here today due to the change in the meeting date. She had a conflict. I met with her yesterday, but she assured me that she'll view the YouTube video of the meeting and be caught up to date on what we do here. So we'll go to staff. Keith?
Keith Hagan, Urban Forester, City of Asheville, Planning and Urban Design.
Thank you. Madeline?
Madeline Stone, Planning Technician.
Mark?
Mark Foster, City of Asheville Public Works Department, City Arborist.
Thank you. Nancy?
Nancy Watford, Planning and Urban Design Department, Zoning Supervisor.
Grania?
Grania Meiser, Planning and Urban Design Planner, Urban Planner.
Okay. Anybody else I missed? Nope. Okay. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. I hope everyone has had a chance to review those. And so right now I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the March meeting.
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I don't think we need a discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, the minutes for the March 2024 meeting is unanimously approved. So we'll go into alternative compliance for 740 Merriman Avenue. Grania?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. Grania Meiser, Planning and Urban Design. I have met with you all before on Google Meet, so it's nice to be with you in person today and good to see you all in 3D. I'm going to present to you today an alternative compliance case. The address is 740 Merriman Avenue. Just a brief little bit of context for you. The project description, it's the renovation of an existing building. It's a vacant restaurant building. For those of you who are familiar with North Asheville, it's the old Subway sandwich shop. The property is 0.77 acres. It was formerly 2 lots. There was a dental building on the northern portion of the property that was demolished sometime last year, and so those lots were recombined. So we have an existing level 1 application that's under review with the level 1 staff. That would be planning and urban design, transportation, building safety, fire, water, and stormwater, all doing the level 1 review for full site compliance on that property due to the vacancy. And so what we're here today to look at is the standard that is being discussed in this meeting today is the type 2 buffer that's required for dissimilar zoning districts. There isn't a proposal for an alternative at this on the application today. So just to give you some context again, this is the property. The building to the north is no longer on the property. That has been demolished. So to the immediate west, we have 14 Sandon Drive. That is also zoned CB2, so we have the same zoning district to the north on the northern portion of the property to the west. The buffer that we're talking about today is located to the east. The property is 17 Larchmont Road and also 11 Larchmont Road. So we have approximately 133 linear feet that would require that type 2 buffer. To buffer from those two single-family homes. Those homes are both zoned RS8, and so it's the dissimilar zoning abutting that is creating this requirement for the property buffer. The existing conditions on the property, this is taken from Google Street View on Merriman Avenue looking west. The existing building is there, the single-story grey building on the left-hand side of the photograph. 11 Larchmont is the blue residence above, and 17 is the grey residence and above and slightly farther behind. The photograph to your right is the northern portion of the site, and again, that red brick house that's in the photograph on the right is actually still zoned CB2, so we don't have any requirement for buffer on that side. The existing conflicts really arise immediately behind the existing building. As you can see, it's fenced off right now. There is a lot of kudzu on there, and the slope is greater than 15 feet. So this is just a quick look at the site plan. The L shape there in the lower left-hand corner is where the buffer would be required to be located. All other components of the actual landscape standards, 711.3, are being met by the applicant. So all our VUA parking, our landscaping, all our street trees, TCP, all those items are in compliance with the standards that are required under the level 1 review. The one that is not being met is this buffer. So the staff findings, we find that the site constraints are not attributable to the actual proposal or to the design of the site or the building. The building is existing, and the physical conditions and constraints are not actually a result of this development or a result of the applicant's own actions. That is really all I can say on this one. I don't have an alternative to support one way or the other, but I can say that those two items are not something that has been created. The site constraints have not been created by the development itself.
Thank you. Is the applicant here?
The applicant is here. Mr. Kane is here. He is the engineer with CDC who's representing the applicant.
Does he wish to?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hearing my project here. As you can see from the photos directly behind the project, we are on a very, very steep slope. Kudzu covers the slope. We are at a 1-to-1 slope existing right now. Makes me kind of take on the concept of do no harm at looking at this project. I don't want to, the other concept would be if you touch it, you broke it, you bought it kind of thing. That kudzu is holding that slope in as stable a condition as it is. I would be uncomfortable telling a landscaper, climb up that 1-to-1 slope with a 300-pound tree, try to get it planted, try to get it to stabilize, try to get it to live for any length of time, try to irrigate it, and then try to protect it from the kudzu, which is more than likely going to consume anything on that slope within 3 to 4 months. So we started thinking about what was the next option. Well, do we want to go at the top and put a screen fence, put a 6-foot privacy fence? I probably think those folks have a pretty good view. I think that would be actually, detrimental to their enjoyment of their own yard is the view out over Merriman down towards Beaver Lake, and I'm sure they're not seeing quite that far, but you kind of see my direction kind of towards the northeast. So we started kind of thinking about where do we go with this? If we don't feel that we can plant it safely, if we don't feel like we can plant it and it survive, and we don't feel like we can screen it with a physical barrier, is the topography, which is about 25 feet from the yard at the top to the parking lot that's in the rear of this building, is the physical topography enough of a visual barrier? And that's where we kind of left it. I kind of came and said, Ms. Meiser was as helpful as she could be. There was nothing that we could kind of come up with to say, you know, what is the buffer that's available to us? I don't feel like it's plantable. I don't think it's constructible for as far as a physical barrier. And I'm just wondering if the topography can serve as enough, and that's where we ended up with meeting with you today.
Thank you. This is a very unusual case, to say the least. In my 6 years on the Urban Forestry Commission, I can't remember a single instance where an applicant for alternative compliance came to us without a request for an alternative to a standard in 711-3, the landscaping standards. So I will come back to that point in a minute, but I'll ask the commission members if anyone has a question for either the applicant or for Ganya.
Oh, question. Have you talked to the adjoining property owners about the kudzu?
They've all been notified. We did not receive any response from anybody.
Okay. So you don't know their stance on having kudzu along the property
We
line?
notified. We noted them in writing per code.
What happens to the kudzu in the winter?
It goes brown.
Yeah, so we're going to, at a brown slope.
Right. But still stable, which is the
Yeah.
key. And the other thing to think about on this is if I can get a contractor to bid on a job where he's going to put his staff on that slope and we're going to put trees there and everything else, I'm assuming the city's going to come back to me then and say, I need to get documentation from a geotechnical engineer that that slope is now stable, and no one's going to touch it. I mean, I won't say it's a bad situation. It's a stable situation. I just don't want to make it any worse.
I have a question. Is the kudzu constrained to that little area?
It's constrained. Can you bring up the photos?
Sure, of course. It's actually along the, it's actually along the whole western
Yes.
side of the property.
And the developers, you know, we've trimmed it at the top of that stone wall there on that photo. Could you go one more forward?
Sure.
And then this little wall here at the back, it's landscape timbers. It's not necessarily in the best condition, but it's holding. And that's kind of where we're leaving it. And of course, you know, my role in this also, just to bring it a little forward, is this is an upfit project that this client is trying to do. So of course they don't want to touch anything they don't have to. So there's definitely economics involved. I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes on that. Just trying to find a solution that I know that I wouldn't feel comfortable walking up that slope at 1-to-1, and especially a couple of feet of kudzu on it. So it's just, I don't like drawing things and telling people to do things that I'm not comfortable doing myself. So that's where we're just kind of stuck on this. And once again, if anyone's got any ideas, it'd be great.
So my question is, have you reached out to ecological restoration companies and gotten their opinions? Because this might be more of a, there are lots of protocols out there for planting on steep slopes and doing ecological restoration. It might not fit exactly with what the landscape ordinance prescribes, but I would be interested if there's been investigation done into seeking creative solutions through ecological restoration companies that could
So
provide.
you're talking like goatscaping kind of thing, or?
Not necessarily. That's like one thing that people know about, and on that steep slope that might be difficult. I'd have to ask. You have to talk to those folks about it. But there's lots of ways to do restoration on steep slopes, and I'd be interested in hearing an alternative compliance based on creative solutions sourced from those companies. So I'm curious if you've reached out to any companies like that.
No, I've not reached out to anyone. The way we looked at this is it is stable, and we're trying to manage costs and everything else as well as compliance. Since it is stable, even to bring the goats and everything into it, to go in there and take down that kudzu, I don't know what's gonna happen 3 months from now, 6 months from now. If that thing starts to roll down in the back parking lot, then we're, $100,000 repair to go in there and build a wall and start from scratch. It's almost like I said earlier, it's the medical approach of do no harm. And if it's sitting there and stable, I'm trying to not break it. So I'm kind of stuck.
So I think one thing that comes to mind is like solutions to examine is I can see trying to plant, like you said, a 300-pound tree on a slope like that would be dangerous and intense. But planting much smaller trees as the kudzu is removed would be very practical in that situation. It would involve certain like minor earth moving, but there are options out there that can be explored for still planting trees and improving a site. So that's my 2 cents.
Chardon?
I really appreciate your concern over, trying to keep the slope stable and keep the soil, on the bank. But I agree with Chris, the methodology of removal largely dictates like how unstable, the slope's gonna be. If you go in there with big machines and try to dig out the kudzu, of course it's gonna do a lot of harm. But there are ways to do it slowly. It takes time and, patience, a couple years, and it might be outside the purview of the typical landscaping standards. But, planting much smaller trees, not necessarily even trees, just shrubs, but removing the kudzu slowly over time so the roots are still stabilizing the soil, but you're still removing the food from the plant by removing the leaves. Not necessarily with goats, you can do that with string trimmers or brush cutters. I have seen a kudzu project that was successful that's off of a street close to my home, off of Beaver Dam, that had, I would think it's steeper than this slope. I don't know for sure, but they successfully removed it. Now, I don't know if they use chemical. I would not recommend using chemical. But they did use some sort of like burlap netting that I've never seen before, as well as replanting the vegetation. And that's been 2 years now, and very little kudzu has come back. And it's much steeper than that, and it's right next to the road, and no soil has come down the slope.
Okay. I'm willing to, pull back and work with staff. If the suggestion from the committee is, let's get the kudzu under control and we can go with a different plant mix than the typical, and she has that authority to grant that, or I can be back here if y'all needed me to come back again. I'm happy to bring you whatever I can develop and research for that. My other concern, of course, is just if the kudzu does come back, it's going to just devour all the efforts. So I'm just kind of, makes me nervous.
Well, that's why I say it's a multi-year process. Like, it's going to come back.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of staying on it and being persistent and not causing so much soil disturbance in one go by trying to remove it in one go.
The other part of this would be, of course, he has a client ready to occupy this building, and he's come to his upfit stage, and the city's held the building permit. Apparently, he worked a little bit freelance before the plans got all approved, and we are fixing that, bringing everything back to standards. If we can come to some sort of agreement where we make the effort at it, we come up with a plan, we start working that plan, and it's not going to hurt his ability to pull building permits and move towards a CO, I think that we come up with a good win-win for this.
Karen?
Thank you. I'm just looking at this picture and I'm seeing a tree in the top center. And I'm wondering if that tree is on your property and if there are other trees on that property, and if just as a minimum recommendation to keep the kudzu off those trees. It's hard for me to tell if the kudzu is growing up into that tree, but it kind of looks like it is from the picture.
I think it's right up to it, but I have a feeling also the landowner at the top of the hill might be doing a little stepping over the property line to keep it under control.
Yeah.
Sees the benefit of it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I feel like Chardon and Chris's recommendations would be ideal ecologically, but as a minimum to preserve the trees that you have on site from being overwhelmed with the kudzu.
That's not a problem whatsoever. I think that that tree is part of our canopy preservation compliance, so it's in our best interest as well that that tree do well.
Anyone else?
And I'll just add one more thing, just because now that I know that tree's on the property, those roots are doing a lot for that slope.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's a big ally for removing that kudzu.
So given the suggestions made by commission members and the applicant's willingness to consider those recommendations, would the proper procedure be for us to vote to continue this alternative compliance case and have the applicant come back?
And that's what I was going to say. Their suggestion is we go
The
ahead
applicant has to request the continuance,
Exactly.
and then you can vote on it if you accept the continuance.
And that's what at their direction and their suggestion as well. I think that's the best way to do this is, we have a little direction, a little bit of expertise that I can kind of use from here. And we've got some staff that's going to work with us. And let's go ahead and we can continue the motion or the review until next meeting. And I'll get my ducks in a row and get you all some more plans to look at.
All right, so I will make the motion that the alternative compliance case for 740 Merriman Avenue, given the applicant's willingness to continue the case to another meeting, and the fact that as of now, staff has determined that this case does not meet either criteria 1 or 2 of the alternative compliance ordinance, that this case be continued. Do I have a second?
I would second.
Okay, is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of continuing the alternative compliance case of 740 Merriman Avenue, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Hearing none, the motion to continue is unanimously approved.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Grania.
Thank you.
Madeline, do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. Before we get into staff reports, I don't see Videla here.
He will be here at 1:30.
1:30?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So we'll start with staff reports. City Arborist, Mark Foster.
Hi. It's been an interesting time. Sorry I missed you all last month. Was out for 3 weeks trying to help my mom in Texas. We're doing the same stuff we do every day. It's like Groundhog Day. So that's why I don't usually prepare a report, because there's nothing really any different to report. If you have certain things that have come up that you want to ask about, I'm happy to discuss them.
Yes, I do. Can you give us an update on the Patton Avenue sidewalk project?
To the best of my ability, sure. I'm not the project manager or anything. I just have the tree bit. The tree pits on the south side of the street are completed, construction-wise. The sidewalk is completed on that side. And I have a vendor lined up for the trees. Now we're just trying to get trees paid for by a method that works for the vendor. Normally, we would just whip out our city credit card and say, give me the trees, man. and she doesn't take credit cards. But she's the only vendor that we've got who is able to deliver those trees. This late in the season, it's a little hard to come by trees to plant. So I'm hoping that when I get back to the office this afternoon, I can get in touch with her and get some kind of update on where we're at with her becoming a city vendor. The north side of the sidewalk or of the street that hasn't yet been worked on, that'll be the next phase of construction. And so the trees on that side will be removed and the sidewalk demoed. And because of its construction timeline, it wasn't anticipated that trees would be going in on that side of the street during what's left of the spring. And so that we're looking at as a fall planting. If the payment for trees situation continues to stumble on for the south side of the street, then those trees will be planted in the fall as well. But I would prefer, obviously, that they be planted sooner rather than later.
So, does anyone have any questions for Mark on that?
What species did you settle on there?
On the south side, we were looking at Tilia cordata and little leaf linden, and the alternate was going to be Japanese zelkova. But the north side of the street, because of the narrower sidewalk, we were looking at Nyssa sylvatica, black tupelo, something that is, ex-current, main stem dominant, so that we can limit up away from all the truck traffic that goes through there, because the sidewalk being so narrow and we can't get the tree very far away from the road edge. And so the USA Foods and, whatever, all the other vendor trucks that are going down Patton would be taking the limbs off on something with more vase shape. And that's what we ran into with the zelkovas that were there before. They took a lot of beatings until they got tall enough to get up above, the truck traffic. Ginkgo, I think, was the alternative choice in the event that we couldn't get the black gums.
So I went back and did a little bit of review of the history of this project in relation to this commission. And Chad Bandy, who's the deputy director of Public Works.
He's the streets superintendent, or streets division manager.
Sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Amy's the deputy director.
Okay, thank you. Appeared before us in November and gave us an update on that project. Mostly the discussion back and forth had to do with the placement and whether there were going to be individual tree pits or pits where there would be two trees within a common area, as well as the species.
Whenever you're ready to ask.
Pardon?
I'm ready to go ahead and reply whenever about
Okay, well,
the
before you
soil
reply.
trenches. Okay.
And I think after that meeting, we sort of, or I'll take the responsibility for that, dropped the ball, in that I had asked Ed Macy, Chardon, and Sharon Summerall to get together and come up with recommendations on species and placement. And unfortunately, I don't think that ever occurred, did it, Chardon?
We shot some emails back and forth, but I don't think anything got coalesced and sent.
Okay, all right. So, Mark, go ahead, you can.
Yeah, Chad and I did discuss the site, and it was the north side of the road, to my recollection, that was where the interest in connecting tree pits was situated. Because of the width of the sidewalk on that side of the road, which is only 8 feet, you have, the tree pit, that's half the sidewalk, or the tree grate. And the tree grate you can actually walk on. And then you have 4 feet behind that. And you have, considerable pedestrian traffic on Patton Avenue sidewalks. If you extended just sort of an exposed soil area in between 2 tree pits or 3 tree pits or however long, you would have, as people try and pass each other, and you have 2 people walking down the sidewalk, that takes up your 4 feet right there. So if you had somebody trying to pass them, they'd be walking into that soil area, compacting it, or tripping and falling and suing us. If you fenced that area off, like those little short fences that we have on Haywood over by the library, then you have, made a bottleneck for a pretty considerable distance where there's, no passing zone, basically, for pedestrians or wheelchair users or whatever. So for the sake of accessibility, we came to the conclusion that it was going to be best not to do some sort of open air pit in that section. It's just too narrow. I mean, it works great someplace like Haywood over there at the library where you got a really vast sidewalk. You don't have that on Patton on the north side. There was also a lot of utility conflicts, but that just made, a complicated situation worse.
All right, thank you, Mark. Any other questions, further questions for Mark? All right, thanks again. I just wanted to note, I forgot to mention that Ed Macy is absent today from our meeting. He'll be here in May. I see that Vidila has entered the room. Vidila, you want to identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Vidila Salvita with Planning Urban Design Department.
Thank you, Vidila. All right, we'll go on to continue with staff reports and Urban Forester. Keith?
Fantastic. Afternoon, Commissioners. So once again, Keith Hagan, Urban Forester for the City of Asheville, Planning and Urban Design. Before I go into, I'm going to go ahead and start with the tree protection ordinance numbers for the year-to-date so far. As you can see up on the board, the canopy preserved to date so far is roughly around 249,000 square feet. The fee in lieu for the central business district is 0. The urban fee in lieu is 286,000. Suburban is 81,000 and some change. And just to reiterate, those are just year-to-date numbers, though those aren't from other years. I will also say that, being on the technical review committee and looking at fee and lieu numbers, there could be a very substantial one coming forward here, should it be approved by council, which would essentially double our urban fee and lieu for this year. So. We have some big fee and lieu numbers coming. Once again, that usually means that they're not going to preserve as many trees, but at the same time, we will definitely be able to add to our totals. The other thing I want to talk about, probably the biggest thing that's been going on.
Before you go on,
Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any questions for Keith on the TRO table?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that I was kind of early on in my time on this commission, but Sharon brought up the point about listing the canopy removed on that table. Is there any possibility of listing that?
Yeah, we can put that back on there. Yep.
That'd be great.
Yep.
I think that would be a little bit more perspective.
Yeah, we'll have to dig into Acela a little bit for that, but, you know, that's one of the biggest things is trying to get these numbers out of a older system, and whether or not they have been reported or entered by other folks. So we will do some digging and see if we can come up with those numbers for you. Absolutely.
On the fee in lieu numbers here.
Yep.
That's year to date. Um, So that doesn't represent any kind of fee in lieu funds that have come in prior to last year?
It does not, no.
Do we have a figure on what the total amount is in the fee in lieu fund?
We would not, at this one, I can get that for the next meeting and kind of give you a larger update of that. Or, possibly redo this chart so that it can tell us that information as well. I think that number is probably somewhere around, I think the last time I saw it was like 360,000 or 368,000 I guess from the start of fee in lieu for tree canopy. So, yeah, it's definitely up there. These are monies that we've already collected and are actually in the bank. So these aren't monies that are kind of floating out there waiting for projects to, go through council and that sort of thing. So we do have a good substantial bit of fee in lieu coming our way. As I go through more TRC projects, then, I'm starting to notice some, different things that, projects are a little bit lacking in. That's going to be one of their outs is to go through the fee in lieu since they've already gone through the planning process, the final process, and they have to go to council. So I have a feeling that those numbers will continue to go up from here.
Okay, with the commission's acquiescence, I would just like to recommend that we adjust this table to have that total amount reflected in there, as well as Chardon's recommendation that we include the amount of tree canopy that's been removed for
Sure.
future.
And do you want that as a year-to-date, or do you want all-time, or both? If we can get it out of Acela, essentially that's going to be our biggest hurdle.
I would say if the canopy preserved and canopy planted are year-to-date, then the canopy removed could be year-to-date too, just
Okay.
to keep them all in the same
Okay.
units,
Yep.
so to speak.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, the further we look back in time, the harder it's going to be to dig that information up there. That's why we're moving on to a different, permitting system, which will, be in place further later this year. So a little bit easier to get those numbers out of there. Right now, it's a lot of data mining to get there. So, anyway,
I'd like to
so
add on to that,
go ahead.
if we're going to adjust the table, it would be also great to see just the full amount of money as well.
That's
Yeah,
what,
that's what we're asking.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's what it
yeah.
as well. Okay,
Yeah, we'll get those numbers
I
for you,
misunderstood,
absolutely.
sorry. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely, I think, once we get our consultant on board, which I'll talk a little bit more about that next, that's going to be one of probably the biggest thing is start, developing a policy for the spending of fee in lieu funds because, although it's safe where it is, I think we definitely have some projects around town that we can use those for immediately. So I'd like to get for the commission to start working on a policy with staff as well. All right, to move on, as far as one of my biggest things this month certainly has been, kicking off our RFP process for the Urban Forest Master Plan. Just to kind of give you some dates as far as what has happened to date. March 15th, we released our request for proposals for the Urban Forest Master Plan. We had a pre-proposal meeting on the 22nd of March. That was attended by 5 firms. Most of them were East Coast. So there were a lot of questions that were asked. And we were able to answer those questions in that pre-proposal meeting. And then the following Monday on the 25th, questions for the proposal had to be in. Now, the questions that were asked in that pre-proposal meeting weren't necessarily addressed again on the 25th. Those were for people that wanted to write in questions. But we did get the same questions, and we encouraged people to, that were in the pre-proposal meeting to submit the same questions. So we got the same stuff essentially that we had already answered, but we were able to take those questions and answer them on the 28th. That's when our addendum went out to the questions, and I think there were 12 questions that we answered, so that consultants can get a better idea of kind of what we were after and that sort of thing. A lot of questions asked on inventories and kind of what we wanted on the inventories, on, what was the minimum number of trees and that sort of thing. And, my answer the whole time has been 15,000. I think we have it in the budget to do it, so I'm going to stick with that number going forward, unless that, that per tree calculation goes up higher. But right now, I think, the per tree calculation is probably going to be sub $5 per tree. So depending on what kind of attributes that we want to capture on each tree. So, so that was the addendum went out on the 28th. Right now, we're essentially waiting for proposals to come back in, and that is due at 5 p.m. on next Monday. So we should be, hopefully, I would imagine if it's any, if it's probably the same with the addendum questions, everything came in last minute. So it was like right to the wire. So I expect the same for proposals. I'm sure they'll take just about all day to kind of go through that, and then we should get those in. Once we get all those proposals in, then it will go off to our review committee, which we do have Ed and Zoe are also on our review committee. I have 9 folks total. Each proposal will be graded, and it'll be applied to a percentage, and then we'll come up with a number. And then essentially that is how we will essentially choose, who the best consultant is for the urban forest master plan. And then, after we, choose somebody, we'll let them know. We go through contracting, which I've been told can take several weeks. So between April 15th and June 11th is when we would like to go back to council and get their approval for the contract. So that's final. After we get their approval for that, then we will actually work with a consultant and pick a start date, which I put on the RFP somewhere around the July 15th. So that's really about it, unless you have questions.
Any questions from commission members? Nope.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Keith. Appreciate it. So that brings us to the end of staff reports. We're on to old business, and that is missing middle housing. Vidila?
Yeah.
So before Vidila starts, when this was first proposed for the agenda, staff was proposing to take limited ordinance changes to the city council that had to do with changes in the ordinance language related to accessory dwelling units, to flag lots, and to backyard lots that are not flag lots. Subsequently to all of that, as a result of, I guess, hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission, that has changed. And now what staff is proposing to take to the City Council on April 23rd is ordinance changes related to cottage clusters and to flag lots, essentially instigated by a citizen petitioner who petitioned the city for these changes. However, I wanted Vidila to give us as much comprehensive overview of where staff is now on missing middle housing for this phase 1. so we can have a discussion and decide what we'd like to do in terms of taking a position on this. So, Padilla?
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So I've titled this Phase 1 Updates, but that's really misleading. Like Patrick mentioned, we're bringing what we were calling Phase 1 to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which was really a group of different recommendations for backyard housing policy. The Planning and Zoning Commission wants to discuss these ideas more, and so we're not bringing that to City Council. So instead, we're just basically the citizen who has initiated this petition for updates to flag lots and cottages wants to move forward on the 23rd. So that's what we're going to address with Council. We're not really talking about trees much. So to the extent that you want to, change this conversation, we can do that because we do have, I think, some exciting changes moving forward with some changes to trees. But I was asked to give you this update, so I'll at least go through where we are, what we're going to be talking with Council, and then we can go from there. So I'll give you an update to our schedule. We're prioritizing our conversation with Council on flag lots and cottages. I do want to mention the relationship to some of these other policies that we think is really a very tight relationship that and why we're making the argument we are for some of the standards for flag lots in particular. And then we can talk about some other things. So here's an overview of the schedule. Assuming Council approves or whatever, they make a decision for flag lots and cottages, whatever it is, we'll be moving forward after that, after the end of this month, with sort of the next steps. And we have this huge basket of different things. This is how we've broken it up, but the way things work, it can be redirected. We can change things around. I've highlighted for your interest what is most interesting, I think, to you, the landscape standards and tree canopy preservation, which we have been suggesting would be part of what we're calling Phase 2. That is a lot of the non-housing specific or not sort of housing supportive zoning changes. We might have to break this apart and bring them one by one through planning, zoning, and city council. I'm not sure. But within that is really a lot of work that we've already done with trees. This is the minimum soil volume standards, third-party inspection, things that that you've all looked at a little bit, but we would need to have a few months. That Phase 2 says August, September, because we need to sort of launch what we're going to do publicly, so the public can start talking about it. Other boards and commissions can weigh in, and I think we can have a real open conversation about that before we start the formal process. Any questions? Okay. So I'll just talk through these two ordinances that we're going to bring to council, or that council's been batting around for a year, really. The first one is cottage development. It's basically an ordinance that started in the Seattle area, and the idea is let's create a way for people to have single-family homes around common open space. And there's lots of different formats, but these are all sort of variations of what they are. The one on the bottom right is in West Asheville. It's I think our best example on Savon Court. So they're, typically smaller homes. The one on the top left looks like they're pretty big, but they're typically smaller homes, really kind of packed in close around common open space. And so I'm just going to show the chart that I developed to make sort of a very easily, it's easy to my mind anyway. On the far left is the current regulations. In the middle is what the citizen petition is suggesting, and on the far right is staff's variation. And the yellow is just highlighting the differences between, where there's a difference between the citizen petition and staff. The biggest one is the first one, which the citizen petition is asking to allow for only 2 cottages. And really, this is to subvert, this is my perspective, the cottage ordinance, which aims to have community living in order to be able to build 2 homes in a single family. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do that, but the staff report that we're developing is very clear, and it says if we want to allow developers or the public or property owners to build 2 homes in single family, we should change the rules for that. We should allow duplexes, or we should just change the regulations in residential districts. We shouldn't undermine the cottage ordinance, which has a very particular orientation around public shared open space. And then you can see what the other differences are. They're not that significant. Really, the big difference is bringing the number of cottages down so you can effectively build 2 units in single-family districts. Any questions about this?
I don't have a question, but I do want to make one very significant point. As the cottage cluster ordinance language that now exists, which requires a minimum number of 5 dwellings, the tree canopy preservation ordinance, section 719, would apply to that kind of development. And the ordinance, the 719, would apply to any developments 3 dwelling units or more. So if the citizen petitioner's ordinance language suggestions were to be approved by the city council, that would mean that cottage clusters, if a developer wanted to only build 2 dwellings, the tree canopy preservation ordinance would not apply.
That's true. However, we've been sort of having some conversations about expanding the tree canopy preservation ordinance, which we're going to do, and we're talking about that. I just want to plant that seed, because if council passes this and maybe somebody gets away with doing some cottages, duplex developments without tree canopy preservation, that would happen between now and when we potentially roll out this phase 2, like in August or September, at which point all residential developments should be covered by the tree canopy preservation ordinance.
Question. Has there been any studies comparing the ecological footprint of having a cottage development versus an apartment complex?
Probably not.
Every time I drive through one of these in town, I can't help but think, I think there'd be a lot less of a carbon footprint if it was an apartment as opposed to houses 6 feet away from each other. And they'd probably hear the same amount of neighbor noise. So I think about that in relation to green space and, just the carbon footprint of infill housing and having 5 separate HVAC units versus, one big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just a thought.
Yeah, if we look at pure efficiency, I'm sure you could, get more people into one building in general. You could make a strong argument that's going to be more efficient. I think the counter argument may be that compared to most residential development in Asheville, that's about 3 units an acre. You can start getting more units on a smaller piece of property. They tend to be smaller units too. So there is an argument to be made that you're providing a different housing typology that isn't completely prevalent everywhere here, and it gives people an option because a lot of people don't want to live in apartments. But it's a good point that I think the real point is what the missing middle housing study says, that we need to move away from the construction of single-family development as a general rule, because 1, we have enough building stock of that already. 2, it is always more expensive because it just uses less land per unit, more land per unit. And so there's an incentive to build more than you need to, because once you already put in the foundation, you might as well put in 2,000 square feet rather than 1,500. And so it tends to build for expensive and better returns. So that is, I guess I just state that because the overarching goal we have over the next year is to roll out zoning changes that will make it easier to build multiple units and more difficult or disincentivize single-family construction. So we are going to be aiming for that.
Gotcha. And that's the idea of decreasing it from 5 to 3, is making it a little bit more incentivized to do this way versus just build 2 houses on that lot.
I don't think we've had, the reason we haven't had people, I think, not choose cottages is because we require too many units as a minimum number. I don't have data to confirm that, but it's true that reducing it to 3 may open up somebody, but I would guess that, you're allowed to build very small cottages. You don't need a big footprint. The one in West Asheville is a little bit over half an acre, and it's, I think, 8 units, right? So I would say that reducing it to 3 is more of just trying to play fair and kindly and trying to reduce the number to what we would believe is an absolute minimum in order to still make it a viable, community-based sort of oriented plan. But maybe there would be a very small piece of property that could pull off a 3-unit cottage that wouldn't in the past.
Does this sort of designation, is it similar to build-to-rent properties?
Well, it could be whatever the owner of the development wants it to be. They could be ownership, or they can be rentals. It's outside of our purview. Yeah, we really don't have any control and knowledge, for the most part, about whether properties are owned or rented. State statute kind of makes it so that we don't get involved in that.
I was just looking at the term cottage. That was kind of my question.
That what?
The term cottage.
Oh.
It seems like it's more like a cluster housing type of designation. So.
I've seen, in Asheville, we have these in some places where they've been sold, and there's a board of directors that shares and makes all the decisions, and in others where they're rentals, and if you drive by, you'll see garbage laying around, and they're not attractive. So it really just depends.
Are there any mechanisms or ordinances that are being proposed or paired with this that ensure affordability for current residents and to counter displacement?
No. No. I mean, by the fact that they tend to be smaller, they will likely be more affordable or more attainable. We're not proposing, and neither is the citizen citizen petition proposing that there should be some requirement or some incentive for that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
What are the chances of updating the TPO to include all residential construction prior to this vote on cottage housing?
0. Well, I mean, just realistically, so city council is already, it's on their calendar, it's moving forward, the cottages and flags, you need some lead time to get on council's calendar. We could potentially move it forward faster than August, if Keith and his team and the rest of planning feels like, this makes sense to do that. There's no reason we couldn't. I think what we probably want to make sure and do is get put out the final documents to the public, so that they see what we're actually proposing and see the red lines, and then everybody can weigh in and have some time before we start the review process to chime in, and then we start rolling. So I'd like at least 2 months for that, and we're at the getting to the end of April, so I would say we should give it at least a couple months.
Are there any,
Is my thought.
are there any mechanisms or ordinances being thought about to prioritize jobs for local contractors, local folks in the construction of or in design of these cottages?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't guess that we're going to have a cottage boom, right? This is one ordinance in the city of Asheville where building is already quite constrained and limited. I'd say in general, you know, the more that we can break down our barriers, we're going to open up more opportunities for builders in general who, if that happens, will be able to hire more people and they'll naturally pick up and create more jobs. But that's a lot of ifs, right? And some of these companies already have a pretty good foothold in the market, and they know, you know, they can tell when regulations maybe become more favorable. And we're trying to do that, but a lot of this stuff in the public process takes a long time. So, you know, on one hand, some people think we should bring a whole package to council and change the entire city regulations overnight, which on one hand could be good, but then there's all these, you know, have you heard all the voices? What are the possible impacts? So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think people and developers find out and they'll start hiring people if they need them.
So I just want to confirm, I'm not trying to be confrontational. The proposed cottages, even though if there's small amounts, there's not going to be any intention put into making them affordable for locals or jobs provided for locals at all.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also to Karen's question, let's not forget that we negotiated other amendments to 719 that's sitting there waiting to go to City Council, including language that would put in landmark trees, as well as language that would deal with boundary trees. So the proposed amendment that would require the individual construction of single-family or duplex housing meet the requirements of the tree canopy preservation ordinance would just be part of that list of amendments. And I think we certainly would want that whole list at least to go forward together.
Okay, makes sense.
So I have a question. In the document that you supplied us, it has that you might suggest that certain neighborhoods be exempted from this first part at some point, certain vulnerable neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Will you still do that with this part that's going forth on the 23rd?
No.
Because this is a whole proposal.
Right, it was, well, I'll speak to that in a few slides at the end here. It's not our suggestion that we do this by any way, in any way. We're suggesting that any of these changes be implemented across the city. But I'll talk to you about the nuance and where that's coming from. Okay, so next is flag lots. These are what you see on the screen. This is an image from West Asheville, taken from the street, and then on the right you see in plan view the parent parcel on the front with the carve out of the flag shaped structure or parcel. And these are really I call them sort of not ideal or not good development patterns because they tend to lead this long flagpole that tends to be a driveway like this, usually really close to other driveways. And so a lot of cities don't even allow flagpoles because they're a somewhat erratic pattern, a development pattern. And you can see in some cases like this, the house in the back might seem It might not be a problem to some people. Some people might think it's too big. So there are some concerns about it. Our current standard requires a minimum 20-foot flagpole. The citizen petition is suggesting 10 feet. But recently, they have suggested they're okay with 16 feet if you require a shared driveway. So what that would mean, in this case, for example, if this house in the front carved off this flagpole and that they themselves used the flagpole itself, that it would be okay to allow the flagpole to only be 10 feet because we would know that part of it would be shared on the other's property. So this is, we think, somewhat of a confused proposal that may have some problems in managing it over time. So we're suggesting that the minimum dimension really should be 16 feet, which is only enough for a 9-foot drive aisle with a little bit of room on the sides for grading. And I'm not sure how much, well, I guess I'll mention this. Some of our approach to backyard housing policy is really to try to keep the structures in the back at 1,000 square feet. So if you can imagine, we have an ADU policy, accessory dwelling units. The thinking is we should allow a little bit more room for ADUs. So we're suggesting to allow them to go to 1,000 square feet, but then to decrease the maximum size of a structure for a flagpole to only 1,000 square feet, so that anybody who builds in the backyard is effectively forced to build small, so that there isn't any problem, perceived problem from neighborhoods about larger structures and this pushback while we're trying to open up some of the gates to allow for more housing construction. So that's a pretty big shift that we've taken, but we feel like it's consistent with some of the direction we're getting. And this is an image to show that in comparing flag lots on the far left with accessory dwelling units in the middle, and then this new policy, which you haven't heard of yet, but we're proposing, which is called the backyard lot. It's basically a little bit of a lot that you can subdivide that has no frontage. You'd be, in all these different typologies, we're suggesting that the house can be no larger than 1,000 square feet, and setbacks would have to be 6 feet. So very easy thing to understand. And if you're walking from the street, they would all look and feel kind of the same, and nobody would know who owns them or what their ownership style is, whether they have street frontage or not. So that's kind of where we're coming from with our most recent suggestion with council on the flag lots. Any questions about that?
I have a question on the flag lot. If
Yeah.
you said that not too many cities do it, why is Asheville even considering it if there's not really a precedent for it?
Well, there is precedent. We've had it on the books for a long time, so it's been out here for at least 30 years. But it has slowly eroded over time. At one point, I believe it was 25 feet, and we brought it down to 20 feet. Now we have pressure to bring it down. He's suggesting 10 feet, right? And, so it does become more problematic because it naturally will lead to civil disputes where property lines are really close together, or you're having to share driveways, or you're grading with such little room that you might be, eroding somebody's property. So for example, one thing we're suggesting.
Killing somebody's trees.
What's that?
We're killing somebody's trees.
Or killing somebody's trees, or just killing the roots, and then the tree dies, and a couple years later. Oh, by the way, you can see on here, in anticipation of the change that we're proposing for tree canopy preservation, we went ahead and calculated how many trees would be required based on these scenarios. So you can see the shadows of the trees in there, and where those trees would be located. So this gives you a sense. In all of them, it comes to about 3 trees between the 2 properties. So that's I think, a positive result that we're we're getting to that isn't related to flag lots, but is related to your work here. But I was going to say for flag lots, we're suggesting that if you choose to have a separate driveway, you have to make it a ribbon driveway, which is basically 2 strips of concrete with grass in between, or some kind of a permeable paving solution. And this is a trade-off where, you know, we hear properties are being eroded and there's more stormwater impacts. So this is trying to give and take. All right. Okay. So I'll mention this question that came up that you all need to think about in some way, I suppose, is do we roll out these changes, what we're calling backyard policy, backyard liberalization of housing across the city broadly, or do we exempt certain geographic areas? Because we've heard from at least Shiloh that they don't want any of this. Now, the housing study suggests that it is in everybody's interest to allow more housing options. If you allow more housing options, you give people more opportunity and you help them find solutions that they may not have today. And so by not giving them those options, we are actually making it more difficult for them. Now, when if a neighborhood leader asks to not want more housing options, do you say, okay, we're not going to give you housing options? That seems to be the direction that council is and we haven't even spoken to them, but I'm already, we're hearing that they want to see an option for a carve out. So just to, Zoe, to answer your question, we may end up carving out some area, but it will not be our recommendation to do that. It will not be the study's recommendation to do that. And it will sort of be an experiment, but it will be at the request of potentially one or more neighborhoods, which will be tricky because if we do that, then they're not included. And in the future, if they want to be included, they have to go through a rezoning process, which is not an insignificant hurdle. And then it begs the question, by not allowing people to have more housing options, how are you limiting them, and who makes that decision? How many people's housing opportunities will be impacted, and they don't even know it? So I think it's a really serious question we need to be asking and thinking about how we come to an answer that is fair, if there is a fair answer. But that's what you read in the report. So anyway, that's sort of a tangent from tree policy, but it may be related in some way. Maybe trees may be involved in somehow. I'm not sure. Haven't thought about it completely.
Steep slope, is that still going to stay the same as far as?
Yes, and steep slope, right? It's based upon grading impacts and number of units, so that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, I think we have a lot of interesting things to talk about for the future with some of these landscaping changes. So that's some positive things coming down the pike.
So by limiting the square feet footprint of flag lot houses to 1,000 square feet, that would potentially, setting aside any amendment to 719, that would require construction of single-family and duplex houses to meet the requirement of the tree canopy preservation ordinance. By setting a maximum square feet of dwelling units in flag lots, that would arguably allow for more opportunities to preserve any existing trees on that parcel or to plant trees. Would that be a fair?
I think that's speculative. I mean, in theory, what you're saying is you're only allowed 1,000 square feet, so you would tend to grade less. you'd tend to impact fewer trees, which makes sense. I think that's fair. But, you know, a 1,000 square foot home may take out as many trees as a 2,000 square foot home if it only covers one story. Because that same footprint with 2 stories wouldn't take out any more trees. But in theory, I suppose you could make that argument that a smaller size of a building, you can't get to 3,000 square feet, so that, unless you went 3 stories, and that is possible. But yeah, typically, it probably would be impacting trees a little bit less, but the number of flag lots that are occurring, it's not significant, really. I'm not sure if this change, I would think that if we pass this, it would put more downward pressure on flag lots, that people would choose to not do them, and that would be our goal, because we would want people to instead use that space, if possible, for larger middle housing, like a triplex or a quadplex or something, and the required parking. It's really hard to say. There's so many factors.
On any of these proposals, is there a maximum allowance for disturbed area on these lots?
No, only if you're in a steep slope, and if you disturb a certain amount of area, you have to trigger greater storm water thresholds. But no, you can grade your entire site. There's nothing from keeping you from doing that.
So when you speak about 719 applying to, are you talking about applying to these situations or single-family dwellings in another situation? I'm kind of confused on the negotiations that you spoke about earlier.
It would apply to any single-family construction of individual, single-family, and duplex dwellings in any circumstance, whether it's flag lot, backyard lots, or anywhere.
Okay, and what's keeping the city from doing that right now?
It's just not part of 719, so we have to add that language to the code that states, currently it says 1 and 2 family is exempt from tree canopy preservation, and we need to change that rule that says, I forgot what we've drafted, but all residential development must comply, and then we put it within a certain classification, which I think is B. So it's basically going to be about 10 to 15% tree canopy. If you clear cut your parcel, you got to do 15% tree canopy. If you preserve some.
So that's going to be put through regardless of what position we take on missing middle housing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But I'll give some perspective on that. Just historically, for the commission, when we were working with staff and DSD on, because we were part of DSD at the time, on the tree canopy preservation ordinance, after we finished our negotiations with staff, staff took the proposal to a group called the Development Customer Advisory Group, which are made up of representatives from, builders, architects, engineers, people who are part of the development community. And they were willing to support this tree canopy preservation ordinance with the provision that there be a carve-out for the construction of single-family and duplex houses. And so in an effort to get their support for this, and because we recognized it as an important first step, we agreed to that. Now we've found that, I believe, according to the GIS tree canopy study that was done last year on all individual vacant buildable parcels and residential zones, that if you take all those together, there's about 45% tree canopy coverage. So since this 719 was enacted by the city council in, I believe it was September of 2020, we still continue to lose a significant amount of tree canopy as a result of the construction of single-family and duplex homes. So, if we can get that amendment passed, that would be another huge step in our goal, and a goal that was encompassed in the zero net canopy loss resolution that the city council passed also in 2020 to try and get our tree canopy coverage back up to 50%.
And I'll just add that I think, to simplify, from my perspective, a lot of this is trade-offs, and if we're suggesting a lot more ways for people to build in Asheville, it's not unreasonable that we up the requirement a little bit for trees. So I think even if there was historically some pushback, that, if you're doing 2 units to have 3 trees on your property, I don't think that's gonna cause a lawsuit. I mean, anything can cause a lawsuit, but, I would say it's a fair trade-off.
So let me just briefly explain. Of course, I was your representative on the Missing Middle Housing Implementation Working Group. And everything that council or staff is going to take to city council, including the cottage cluster, flag lots, and everything else or a lot of what's going to be coming before council in the August-September timeframe, was a result of consensus that was reached by the working group members. So as your representative on this working group, my primary concern was to look out for any impact that missing middle housing changes might have on the tree canopy, on green infrastructure, and on the environment in general. However, as Videla just acknowledged, it was a matter of balancing and a matter of trade-offs. And so I was part of the consensus for what staff is taking part toward the city council. At the same time, the working group, the other working group members was part of the consensus for doing something related to preserving tree canopy in some way related to single family and duplex housing. Now, saying that, that's no guarantee that other groups may oppose that amendment when it comes before the city council. And that's not to say that the amendment would be a slam dunk for city council approval. But I felt that we would have a better chance if there was consensus on that part of missing middle housing, as well as other ordinance changes not related necessarily to trees or to landscaping standards, to allow the opportunity for the city to offer other housing options to citizens of the city. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm comfortable with the consensus that I reached on all aspects of what the working group considered from staff, and which staff then embraced and is ready to take to the city council. However, I am just one person, and it'll be up to the commission to decide whether it wants to take a position on the staff recommendations that will go to city council on cottage clusters and on flag lots, or whether we just take a position on one or the other, or whether we take no position. I think the cottage cluster particular proposals are very important, because if the citizen petitioner's request is approved, then cottage clusters could not be required to meet the tree canopy preservation ordinance if the number of dwellings are reduced to 2. As far as flag lots are concerned, it is theoretical, I agree, but potentially there is more possibility for preserving existing trees or planting trees on flag lots in the rear. So the fact that the amendment to the tree canopy preservation ordinance that is critical here is not going to the city council until at least August or September. Admittedly, I'm sort of asking to accept a pig in a poke, because we have no guarantees as to what is going to happen between now and August or September. So giving that background, I'll open it up for general discussion from commission members.
Can I ask Videla one more question?
Sure.
Can you point to a city that took this company's recommendations on missing middle housing and implemented them?
Sure. South Bend, Indiana, redid their entire zoning code from Opticos, and they have a really nice document. And they've also created a palette of house plans that are available to the public for free to encourage middle housing. And so they have a lot in that they've developed to encourage and incentivize the direction of the development to go in that direction. For the most part, a lot of this is really new. The whole missing middle housing movement has only taken off in the last handful of years. So you can find, all over the map how it's going in different places. I think we were sort of fortunate in that we decided to put a lot of money into a study before actually making any zoning changes. Some cities just are inspired and they're like, they make the change and then they get all this pushback. So we have a pretty big document that has a lot of ideas for how we can move forward. And, I encourage you to look over it. It's a 150-page document, but it has a lot of good ideas. I think, in my mind, this is really more for setting the stage for the long term of Asheville, because most of the residential property is built out, right? When you look at this image, for example, everybody says, oh, yeah, it looks at that and it looks great. But, we don't, we only have vacant property is a very small percentage of residential land. And so the opportunity for duplexes, triplexes, cottage courts, all these things are going to be implemented very incrementally over time, over a long period of time, as homes are demolished or burned down or flood hits them or a tree lands on them. And in the meantime, we have opportunities in backyards that we need to take advantage of. So that's why we're sort of trying to focus a little bit on this backyard housing policy to allow people to feel like they have a way to take advantage of property that they may not have access to today.
And when you said the 45% canopy, was that including the backyard lots?
Well, that's what I'm not clear about, and I was hoping to have Sam Starbaum, who is a city planner here, to answer that question, or Chris Collins, who at the time was his supervisor, and who I originally discussed about doing the GIS study, but both of them are on vacation, couldn't make it to this meeting.
Well, the short answer is yes, there are trees in backyards, and those trees are going to be coming down if somebody's going to build. So I think it's not, I mean, it's obvious that there will be tree impacts for any development in Asheville. The upside will be that we will have a tree canopy preservation ordinance in place that will get people to try to protect, to preserve trees, or to at least record them as part of the tree canopy preservation
Yeah,
plan.
I kind of feel like that should come as a given. It shouldn't have to be at the, us giving a green light to more development. I think that should be already rolled into recommendations to city council, and it shouldn't be contingent on us, approving or putting our approval stamp on more development.
Well, that might be a good perspective is I'm not suggesting you do this, but you could support further development initiatives contingent upon expansion of the tree canopy preservation ordinance, which we're talking about already. But you never know if things actually will transpire, so that might be good to have written and expressed from UFC.
Thanks, Chardon.
But we're talking about the proposal that you're going to take forward on the 23rd, right?
Correct.
That has to do specifically with the flag lots and cottage developments. And I see that proposal as cutting off some possible, the kind of development that's not desirable, that tends to go out to the very borders at this time. And I think this proposal is, I too worked on the mixed middle housing working group, and this is like an evolution towards allowing some houses to be built that are specific to our situation in Asheville. And I think it's very positive.
Well, it might just be a way for UFC, if you want to express sort of being moderate and expressing that, that this is all give and take, and that this seems like a reasonable adjustments to allow for more development, knowing that there's a lot of housing pressure and housing is important, and you guys value housing and the need for people to have housing. And you can express that we're hoping to approve a lot of ordinances by August that will further enhance tree canopy.
But I think it's also important to point out that this is not aimed towards creating housing that's more affordable, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Missing middle housing is, per se, is never meant to be affordable housing. It just means offering more housing options to more people who can't really afford to buy a single-family house, which is the most expensive.
Which in effect is creating affordable housing.
So I would like to speak on this
Should be,
topic
yeah.
since
I think the point is that we can't, in a tight housing market, it's very difficult to manage pricing. Middle housing tends to be more affordable because you have more units over the same amount of land. So they tend to be smaller units, you get 2 units over the same, or 3 units, and so they tend to be more affordable. But that still might be very expensive, so depending on how you're using the word affordable, we just have to be careful.
Right, we just have to look at San Francisco and Seattle. Yeah.
Exactly, right.
I might be oversimplifying this, but it looks like, are there two different votes that are happening where is the staff proposed version versus the citizen petition version? And it seems like from a UFC perspective, if our, our mission is to advise on tree preservation, and the citizen petition version does not fall under our ordinance, that it would be very difficult to support that at this time. And that this is an ongoing evolution where as we amend the ordinance, we could revisit that in the future. Is that?
Well, what was your point that?
My point is that I would prefer supporting the staff proposed version that says 3 minimum number of cottages, because that falls under our TPO currently. And
Yeah.
it seems like as our mission, we should be using that as our guideline, rather than supporting something that does not currently fall under our TPO. And once we do get those amendments in place, we could revisit the minimum of 2, because then that would be covered by the TPO. But I'm personally hesitant to vote in favor of something that wouldn't cover tree canopy preservation at this time. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'd like to speak on the affordability issue and the goals here. So the goal is to improve our community for everyone, and specifically the people who live here already. I would say get a priority over top of people who do not live here yet. I think that's something that most of us can agree to. Now, thinking about the environmental piece of this, we're also trying to decrease urban sprawl because we know all of the negative consequences that come with that environmentally. And we're trying to increase housing for locals. Denser housing does not cause that. It does not decrease urban sprawl in any literature that I could find during my research. I have an article pulled up on my laptop right now from Yale that says one of the biggest things for decreasing urban sprawl is not building more housing, it's building more affordable housing specifically. Because all that happens when you build housing that is not intentionally affordable is you have more folks moving in with more money that displace the people who've lived there who do the labor in the city. And then there's more driving in and out, and so more housing gets built outside of the city, which creates more sprawl. And so I see this as actually a detriment to a lot of the environmental things that we're trying to work for and encourage. And affordable housing doesn't happen just because we have more housing. The economy is not an isolated piece like that, especially in a place like Asheville, where it's a much larger ecosystem than that. It's only going to continue to get more and more popular. We build more housing. There's no way that's going to keep up with the demand for housing. It's going to end up being, if we just let the market handle it, developers are going to build housing that is for people who can pay the highest price. That's how the housing market works, unless we create some kind of intentional stuff with affordability. So I have a really, really hard time, and it makes me really uncomfortable to support anything that does not intentionally, or at least have the conversation to look at specific mechanisms to support the people who have built the culture and the infrastructure of the city. And so unless there's actual conversations being had or intentional looks at things like community land trusts or supporting the people who've lived here for generations and creating things affordable, I cannot support this. And my motion would be to postpone this indefinitely.
So I can provide a counterpoint, and I can give you a source, to look at research that describes even the provision of housing, increasing supply, even if it's not affordable, is good for affordability, because there is this shift that happens where, in some cases, you're right, people from other states come in, but in other cases, somebody who just wants better housing in this community moves, and so they free up their house that may be an older house. And so somebody else comes into their house, and that shift continues. And so eventually, lower housing gets freed up by the people who have interest in getting newer housing. And so that's been documented, and it shows that affordable housing is opened up even by purely market-driven housing. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't also be creative and thinking about how to find more affordable housing. We have an affordable housing plan that the city is in the middle of developing right now. And part of the reason that, well, they will be making recommendations for specific tools that we can implement to make housing more affordable, like land trusts and supporting home repairs and things like that, that can become expensive for people, that force them out. So there are other things that we're looking at. It's not under our purview, which for the most part is zoning. We do have some in the housing study anti-displacement strategies, but counterintuitively they are the production of housing based. We don't tend to think that the production of housing is an anti-displacement strategy, but at its root, if you are not producing housing, you are getting a shorter supply of housing. It makes it more challenging. So it's more of a long-term strategy. For example, these proposed backyard lots is a way that we can take what typically is a single-family lot. So imagine, 2/3 of our zoning districts, 2/3 of our residential land is single-family zone. And if now you can actually cut off a little bit, I mean, most people don't want to cut off their backyard and sell it, right? I don't, but some people might, and that will start to create more supply. That'll be smaller units, and this is our biggest need in Buncombe County, 1 and 2 bedrooms, because we have an aging population, and so there's just a need there. So it all tends to line up. And anyway, so I would just urge you to, if you want, I could find this report and share it with you.
I'd be happy to hear it. I appreciate your response and your clarity with explaining everything today. I just have a hard time supporting something like missing middle housing if we're not first trying the tried and true methods to counter urban sprawl and to provide affordable housing, which there's a long list. You take a quick Google search of strategies, right, to work towards affordable housing. There's success stories, small in scale, but success stories throughout the country, and I've seen zero evidence of us doing that in Asheville. And until we try those strategies, as you mentioned, like exploring those greater strategies, and I appreciate that, I don't know why we're trying something else.
Well, we have lots of different tools, as I'll leave it at that, and that, zoning, we currently disallow anything but single family in 2/3 of our zoning districts. On 66% of our land, we only allow one type of housing. That's a very strong market disincentive to have affordable housing by limiting it that strictly. And we've been doing this for many, many years. That's as low-hanging fruit as you can get, I would suggest. And that's very easy for us to change, and we're suggesting to change that. But there are plenty of other tools and other strategies. So I'd suggest looking at the missing middle housing strategies that are there. The affordable housing plan will have some strategies, and at least between those two, you're basically going to see all of the strategies that are viable and legal in our state.
Is there not a big presentation on affordable housing this evening?
There may be, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think there is. Either sometime this week, there's a large presentation on, which includes, is it Cox Avenue development that
Not
the
sure.
county's doing? Yeah, there are things that are happening, but they're split up into different areas.
Okay, one more comment, and then we've got to decide what we want to do. Short on.
Well, I feel like I've talked a lot. Is there anybody else that wants a question? I guess question more is like to an urban planner, like, is there any talk about an end game here? Like, how much can these mountains really support in a city of Asheville? Between the sewer system, water infrastructure, traffic, all these things that we're creating all this infill, and I understand there's a need. But what's the end game here? How big can we truly be?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I would love to be a part of hiring a consultant team to have that as our goal. Because you're right, I think ultimately if we are thoughtful, if we would, have goals like that. But it's what's so difficult is we're dealing in this global marketplace where we don't have as much control and people can come and go as they want and global capital does the same. And in some ways, we're getting philosophical, but it is kind of we like seek the lowest common denominator, and are we all going to just, like, to what extent do we want to preserve, when you preserve it and do a good job preserving your community, it becomes more attractive and more people want to come here.
I guess a more specific question would be like, how many units or how many more residences does this plan project in the next 10 years and relative to traffic currently?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer that. The Buncombe County is a lot bigger. I mean, we're in the county, but the rest of the county is much bigger than we are, and they just finished a master plan, and they're planning to roll out zoning changes to align their plan. And they have most of the developments happening in the county because land is cheaper there. But you're right, that incentivizes more driving, more congestion, everything that we don't want. And so I think, if I have my balance hat on, I would say, we just need to really continue to push more efficient housing, so more people in smaller areas, at least as options, because we know that the single-family housing stock is really big here. So if we need to diversify housing, we need to continue to plant more trees and have better policy for tree canopy, more walkability and better transit. And we need a bond for really better investments in transit and to keep moving in that direction. I'm not sure what the end game is, but if you've been to Europe, that would be my end game is a lot more good transit that is on time, walkability, and denser housing.
And where cities have put a cap on development, I will also add.
Right. I'm from the West Coast. Oregon has had a urban growth boundary for many, many years, and it's worked. But, that's also part of state statute and state legislators here. So some things are out of our control. A lot of them are.
Yeah, I mean, just to add my 2 cents, I think that I'm all for more condensed housing. I don't think that I really support these 3 items here. If we're trying to minimize single-family units, then we're making it easier to build single-family units. I understand building apartment complexes and the denser housing, but I don't, as an urban forestry commission, this is gonna take out a lot of trees by allowing this to happen with only, the addition of single-family homes.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion from anyone.
Should we go over the options, the options for the motions, rather, to support the staff suggestion, to abstain from having a recommendation, or to not support the staff suggestion?
So there could be a motion to support staff's recommendation in regards to the cottage cluster amendments as well as the flag lot amendments. We could have a motion to support staff's recommendation on cottage clusters only and not take a position on flag lots. We could entertain a motion to not support either the citizen petitioners or the staff's recommendations on both cottage clusters and flag lots. So those are our options.
What happens if we don't support either one?
If we don't support, my concern is if we don't support either one, then it could make it more difficult to get support for the tree canopy preservation ordinance amendment.
Is there a pathway towards getting affordable housing mechanisms? And that's my goal, is I want to see if there's a way that we can, I don't like setting the precedent of like supporting missing middle housing throughout this entire process without there being consideration of affordability at all. And so I'm looking for ways to, I want to work with people, obviously. I don't want to hold things up unnecessarily. I want to be strategic. Like, I'm not trying to like stop everything, but like, how do we get affordability as part of this conversation? Is there any way that we can get that included somehow?
So, as I think Vidila alluded to, in North Carolina, municipalities are very limited in what they can do by the state legislature, particularly General Statute 168. And so it really limits the ability for the city to, for example, say, we're going to have missing middle housing, and the only people that can buy them are local residents, or the only people that can build them are local workers. We can't do that. As far as requiring developers to set aside a certain percentage of housing under the 80-20 affordability or 60-20 affordability AMI ratio, that would be a conversation I think that staff would need to have and the city council to consider. I'm not a legal expert by any stretch of the imagination, so I can't say what the city's legal ability to accomplish that is. Now, you know, we could, for example, pass a motion to support staff's recommendations on cottage clusters, particularly because that would have an impact on tree canopy preservation, and flag lot. And within the motion, we can, as a statement of intent, include language that we would like, in return for our support, we would like to see some kind of effort made to make missing middle housing as affordable as possible, so that we're evoking a sentiment.
Would it be possible, say we were to approve them, to include in that amendment to make a specific, maybe it's an intention or suggestion of like, I understand that there's state legislature that prevents certain actions, but there's still creative tools that could be used. So could we make some kind of motion that adds on like a report to be created or an exploration of things like community land trusts, community participation events, things like thinking about community benefit agreements being made in the small geographic areas of like, there's lots of tools out there, right, that are might get around state legislature. I don't know, I'm also not a legal expert, but I would like to see, yeah, I think I'd be interested to see if there's a way we can get some of that work done.
I think it's perfectly appropriate to include that in the motion. Of course, it's non-binding, but I think an expression of sentiment is always appropriate. So do you want to take a stab at a motion?
It's gonna be complicated.
I think that I would like to support the staff recommendations on the cottage clusters and the flag lots specifically, because I think that's what's gonna go before council. Because I think it really kind of heads off the kind of development that would affect forest canopy, with the provision that we support the expansion of the tree ordinance to cover single and duplex situations. I see the situation, I actually go to some planning and zoning meetings, and when big developments come before city council or before planning and zoning, they often make provisions for affordable housing, which is a negotiation with the city often about taxes paid and that sort of thing. It's very complicated, but very large projects can opt to do that, and there are incentives for them to provide affordable housing in those particular developments, which are really large. I don't see somebody coming forth with the kind of developments that Missing Middle is looking for. An ideal one to me would be the small kind of apartments that you see in Montfort, six apartments. They're meant to be congruent with the neighborhood. A developer would be hard pressed to ask for an affordable unit in one of those. I don't know what kind of negotiation they could have with the city about that as far as their taxes or anything like that. So I mean, when I first started working on this, I had the same questions, but I think most of the projects that are proposed, it's not likely that at the level affordable housing can really come into it, if that makes any sense. It's too bad, because affordable housing is strictly defined on income levels in this town. And I don't know, I could be wrong, but that's just how I see this as a different kind of way to provide housing for people who are a little bit above affordable. The people who come here to work, you know, in certain types of jobs and can afford higher than, because affordable is very low. It's defined as a very low level. Am I right about that?
All right, I'm going to make a suggestion because I think this is a very important action for the commission to take. I'm going to request a 10-minute recess, give Chris a chance to sort of compose a motion, and then we come back and take a vote. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Patrick, yeah, we're almost
I
out.
know.
We got 3 minutes to kind of wrap this up.
Well, this is very important for us to do.
Yeah, but I also think we're kind of following off the topic a little bit. I mean, we're talking about how, we're supposed to be dealing with trees. If you want to like make a statement to move on, I think that would be appropriate, or take a motion to move on. And then, but I think taking a 10-minute break with, only 3 minutes left in our agenda is kind of, we're getting kind of a little far down in the weeds here. And I'm not saying that you can't do that. What I'm saying is, I mean, if we take a 10-minute, how much time
5
are we
minutes?
going to allow to come back?
5-minute break,
5-minute break?
compromise?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
All right, we're going to
That's
recess
fine.
for 5 minutes. We will come back at, at 3:05.
Thank you, Videla.
Thanks, Vanilla.
next thing up was the ordinance review. And, yeah, so, toodaloo.
How are you doing, Patricia? Yeah. It can be a tough time in the afternoon. We need coffee. Yeah, I think so. I'm leaning that way too.
Okay, the April meeting of 2024, the Urban Forestry Commission is reconvened at 3:07 PM. Do we have a motion on, in regards to the proposed ordinance changes related to cottage clusters and flag lots?
I'd like to propose a motion to support both the cottages and the flag lots under the condition that there is an intention attached to the support in supporting the exploration of affordable housing strategies in all missing middle housing proposals, including strategies that have been implemented in other cities, including and not limited to community land trust, community participation events that factor in community opinion into developments, just cause eviction ordinances, community benefit agreements for all new developments, tenant to option purchases, and other affordable housing strategies.
Okay, you've heard the motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I think the motion should say that we're moving to support staff recommendations on flag lots and cottage. And I think we should also add the provision that, that we would like to also support the expansion of the tree ordinance to cover single and duplex housing in our motion.
Are those amendments amenable to the maker of the motion?
Yes.
Are they amenable to the person who seconded the motion?
Yes.
Okay. All right, is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Hearing none, the motion is unanimously approved. And I just want to say, as your representative to the Missing Middle Housing Implementation Working Group, I really appreciate your time and attention on this. I know it's not easy, and some of it is a little bit out of our comfort level for Urban Forestry Commission, but I think you all did a really admirable job on this, so thank you very much.
Somebody write it out.
Do you want to write out the motion and give it to Madeline?
I didn't get it all. If you just send me an email or if you wrote it down, that would be great. And then Zoe, if you could do the same with your amendments, or I can just listen to the YouTube video back, but I just wasn't able to catch all of it.
Yep. I can.
Okay, we'll move on to working group updates. For the interest of time, I would just ask each working group if there's anything that they want to bring up that is so important they can't wait till next meeting. Policy working group?
No.
Okay. Fee and lieu working group?
No.
Okay. Education and enforcement working group?
No.
Okay. Then we're done with working group updates. New business, we already dealt with that in the city arborist report. So I then will hereby declare that the April 2024 meeting of the Urban Forestry Commission is hereby adjourned.